Well, for those of you who've been following along on my series of lesson plan design, we are at the end. And tonight we're going to be talking about the missing pieces. So if you've been using the ETSU lesson plan template, you know that there are some parts we haven't filled in yet. So let's take a look. Okay, for one, there are materials, resources, and technology. This section, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. We've got to list the materials and resources that you're going to use in technology. So much of being a good teacher, an effective teacher, means being a prepared teacher. So lesson planning is important. You need to know what you're going to do, but you often need to think about what all materials you're going to need. So whether you're writing your materials list on a Post-it note or on your lesson plan, it's got to happen. Our lesson plan template at ETSU has this section called Material Resources, and it says, what do you need for this lesson? Identify within a bulleted list the specific materials and resources that you will use. Describe how these materials and resources add value, depth, and extend students' learning. Now, this student did make a bulleted list, but there is no description. This we have for technology. So you list the technology that you're going to use. And here she does give an explanation. She says the technology used for this lesson supports a variety of student needs within the learning environment by aiding the ELL student with an enlarged visual, blah, 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 blah. And so she's explained why she's using this specific technology. So you want to think about, what do you need for this lesson? You're going to identify with a bulleted list and then describe how these materials and resources add value, depth, and extend learning. Let me go back. So you're going to include any materials that you're using for instruction. If you're reading a book, make sure you have the title and the author of the book. If you're using a workbook, have the name of the workbook and the pages. What else do you need? Do you need handouts? Do you need pencils, markers, highlighters, manipulatives? What do the students need to have out on their desk? What do they need to have out at the beginning of the period? What are you going to hand out later? Do you have a plan for getting these materials out to them? For example, the handout will be used for this last part. You can put, the handout will be used to help motivate and activate interest as well as support student engagement and inquiry during class discussion. It will be used as a model as students create their own lesson plans. That describes how these materials and resources add value, depth, and extend the student's learning. Let's look at the technology section. In the technology section, there are parts A, B, C, and D. Part A, describe the technology you plan to use in the lesson. For example, document camera, iPad, etc. So these would be the type of technology. You know, technology is more than just computers. It's also anything, you know, electronic, clocks. I'm coming at a loss. This seems to be like a pretty good, you know, if they're going to use their phone, it seems like they're going to use earbuds, whatever they need. Okay. Example B, how does the identified technology in your lesson improve student learning? Okay, here's an example. The document camera will be used to project images for student observations and teacher modeling. This will promote student learning by allowing everyone to focus on what the teacher is modeling and expecting. Very good. And C, explain how you will use the technology to support a variety of student needs within the learning environment. The document camera will be used during the set of the lesson to display visual representations to activate and motivate learning. So we know when it's used and why. It will also be used during the instructional procedures as the student models how to complete a Venn diagram. So we also know that it's not only used in the set, but it's also used during the instructions so that the teacher can model. And D, if you use this technology to design and implement formative or summative assessments, please explain. Now here's an example. The iPad will be used during the formal formative. The students will complete an exit ticket that has been preloaded on the iPad. And here's a final question you can address. Did you use the technology to collect and or analyze your data to inform instruction? Explain. The data collected from the iPad application will be used to collect learning outcomes and adjust future instruction. So this is a really good example of how to complete the technology section. Here is the rubric that we use at our school for materials and resources. You want to make sure that they are appropriate for the content and the level of students. And you want to make sure that the use of them has been modeled, or how you're going to use them in this particular lesson is modeled. And you need to make plans for how students are going to use them. Not just out on their desk, just for fun, but what are the plans? And you also describe how the materials add value, depth, and extend student learning. Technology. Technology is adequately identified, explains how the technology will improve student learning, and is appropriate for content or level of students with diverse learning needs and student learning environment. So here we had another and added, includes a description of how technology is used to support formative and or summative assessment to inform instruction. Here's an example of a student who is listed, and you can't see the heading up here, but this is her materials and resources. She's got her bulleted list, and she says, I will model how to use these materials during my explanation of stations. And then she talks about why, and then she goes on into more detail. In addition, blah, 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 blah. And then finally, so she's addressed all of those things that were in the rubric. And here for the technology, the bulleted list. The technology that I chose to use in this lesson supports a variety of student needs within this learning environment. So she talks about struggling learners, problem-solving skills needed, formative assessment. So she's got it all pretty well covered there. Good job. Okay, let's go on to co-teaching. Now, depending what kind of class that you're taking right now when you're watching this video, you may have a placement that you can go to in order to try out the lesson plan that you're working on, or maybe you're just doing observations, or maybe you're not even in a field placement. But you can think about how having co-teaching models might be really important to having student teachers in your classroom. Because a lot of the times what people have to do is that they have to figure out how to deal with two teachers in the room. So we have this co-teaching, which means that both people are teaching, both are teachers, and how do they go about doing that? So we have team teaching. In team teaching, both teachers are delivering the same instruction at the same time. So they've probably planned this out. They're both at the front of the room, or one's talking, the other one's to the side, and then they swap out. Maybe the very first part of the lesson, one teacher does, and then the second part, the other teacher does. That's co-teaching and team teaching. And you have alternative teaching. This is where one teacher is going to work with the large group while the other teacher is working with a small group of students. So this happens a lot in student teaching situations because the mentor may take the large group and then send students to the back who either are doing really well, or they're struggling, or they just have a different project that they're working on, or maybe they need makeup work, or makeup assessments, whatever. So this is something that we see a lot. Stations also, especially in the elementary grades and even the middle grades, we see stations a great deal. And that's where students move around independently to different stations where they work on activities. And in this type of teaching, each teacher would have a station where they're doing a different portion of the lesson or a different activity. And then you have one teach and one assist. And this is the one that requires the least planning. So because it does not require as much planning, often it's the fallback. So one person takes the lead in the teaching, and the other teacher moves around and they make sure that the students are staying on task. They are there to help students when they don't understand, or they got lost in the notes, or got behind, or need a pencil sharpened, or whatever. There are other models to co-teaching, but those are the four most popular ones. I'll just go back real quick. These are the four most used co-teaching models, the ones that you're most likely to see and experience in your placements. And so for our purposes, you can just choose from these four, but just be aware that there are some more that you will learn about in another semester. So you're going to talk about in this section which of the co-teaching model that you've used and explain how it's being used. This person has described how they used one model at the beginning and another model during the end of the lesson. Okay, now let's talk about the theory and rationale section of your lesson plan. The most dreaded part, because oh no, I have no idea what to put, Miss Rock. Help me, help me. Well, we make instructional decisions based when we're designing something. Why are you designing it this way? For example, if you're going to move the furniture in your living room, why are you moving it? Why are you going to put the couch here instead of there? And so you've got reasons. If you've got a husband, if you've got to explain to him why you want your furniture moved, you're going to have that all worked out in advance, right? You're going to say, well, honey, I need it moved so that the blah, 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 whatever. Well, in teaching, where we're trying to be intentional, we need to have reasons for what we're doing. So we don't do things because they're fun. We do things because they motivate children. And fun stuff motivates children. So the rationale would be, for example, that something is motivating to the students because it's fun. We then here, this is the part that's really hard, because what you're doing is that you're applying everything that you've been learning in your foundations courses and your education courses. Now we're putting it all together. And why are you making these plans? So in the theory and rationale, you're not going to have to, defend everything you did all the way through the lesson plan. But we do like for you to come up with one or two examples. So you think about, for example, did you employ gradual release of responsibility? I think you did. And did you maybe think in terms of Madeline Hunter? Apparently you did because I asked you to. So these are some things, that's what we're talking about. So in order to support your teaching practices, you need to be able to reference reliable research and theories. Now, different teachers will give you different formats to use, and these aren't must-haves, but they are helpful. So here's a good sentence format to use. According to blank, Vygotsky, Marzano, any educational theorist. According to blank, in their blank article, book, whatever, it states that blank, which supports my usage of blank. Thus, this lesson is important for my students' understanding of blank. So that's just to help you get started. All right, so here's a look at some example. I'm implementing a three-act task. And so she talks about what she's going to do, and then she says why she's doing it, and then she says this is appropriate to use, blah, blah, blah. She has a citation. Here, I'm scaffolding as an assessment modification, and she describes scaffolding. She mentions Vygotsky. Lots of good stuff here. Good job. Good job. Well, guys, that is all. Yay! High five. I will see you soon. Bye.